everybody? Dr. Jerry Burkett here with another edition of the School Rules Podcast, Home Edition. We're in the summertime semester at my university, and so the podcast now moves to the home studio where sometimes I'll work in the office, sometimes I'll work at home. So I brought a studio home so I can do some things here because I do have some summer classes, and there are still some important issues happening in education and educational leadership, and some things going on that my students need to know about. So this is what the format will largely look like for the summer session. So I'm happy that you're here still with us. And frankly, we're growing. And I wanted to say thank you to everybody who listens, because I don't do this to be paid for it. I don't do this to monetize it. But it's exciting that people are getting information from the podcast and using it wherever they're using it. I do this because it kind of came out of COVID as a way to connect with students. And now I use it as my primary source of lecturing when I do lectures for my classes, because we're 100% online at my university and at Texas Women's University. I can say that. They've been very supportive of the podcast, and that's where the studio is full-time. But I also want to point out that because of the number of listeners that we've had and the number of viewers that we've had, because we're available on Spotify and on YouTube and in all the places that you get your podcast, very recently, our podcast was named one of the top 80 educational leadership podcasts according to FeedSpot. And thank you, FeedSpot, for being very supportive of the podcast, helping us out, putting us on your list. It's a very comprehensive list. We're actually number 39 on the list, so I'm very happy to be part of that. And we have a badge for that. So thank you, and we'll put that up on the podcast, and we'll put that up on the site. And so again, thank you to FeedSpot for helping us out, spreading the word about the podcast. We're very excited to be part of that. All right, this week, one of the classes that I have is an educational leadership seminar class where we talk about the concepts of educational leadership. We talk about transformational leadership, ethical leadership, transactional leadership. So we did a lot of focus on that last week. But I want to take a moment, because I do have doctoral students and I have master's students, and because they are graduate level students, that someday they might want to publish. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about publishing and what publishing looks like in academic journals, because it's kind of our bread and butter in academic world. We have to publish. In fact, some of our larger universities, these tier 1, research 1, big schools, you think tier 1, R1 schools, you're thinking big, giant public and private universities. If you can name a giant public or private university in your head, they're likely a tier 1, R1 research institution. And professors that work at those institutions, they live their life through publishing and publishing through academic journals. I want to talk about what that process looks like for a little bit, because it's been in the news recently, talking about the different types of journals, and there's been some suggestion that maybe some of our professors that work at very important scientific institutions maybe shouldn't be publishing in very important scientific journals, because maybe those journals are leaning towards a bias, or maybe they're taking money from corporations. I can't speak to that, and I don't want to speak to that. But what I do want to speak to is just sort of giving at least my students and those who listen a general understanding of what an academic journal is, how to publish in one. I want to talk about why it matters in academia, what the way these journals typically work, especially the more reputable ones, and also just let my students know what the process looks like. I happen to be an associate editor for a journal, and I can talk to you a little bit about what the submission manuscript process looks like, how the peer review process works, and talk just a little bit about, just in general, what is an academic journal and how does it work. So let's talk about that. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is that when it comes to academic journals, if you were just to do a quick search on whatever search engine that you use, and searching the term academic journal, you're going to get a very, very long, millions and millions of hits on what an academic journal is, because there are academic journals all over the world. And they serve a purpose. Generally, the purpose that they serve is to publish and disseminate research that is related to a particular subject or content area. So let's just take me for an example. I work in education, which is a pretty broad area. But if you start Drilling down a little bit, I'm in educational leadership. And even then, that's a very broad area. But there are journals that are dedicated to educational leadership. There are some very top tier and higher end journals dedicated to educational leadership. For example, the Journal of School Leadership, JSL, is a high end, top tier journal related to educational leadership. Now, what makes it a high end, top tier journal? Well, it's because usually it is double blind peer reviewed, which means two people reviewed your manuscript and you don't know who they are, but they are absolutely 100% experts in the field of educational school leadership. And they only accept articles and manuscripts that are highly impactful, high impact, to the school community, to the journal. In other words, the research is sound, the data analysis is amazing, the literature review is outstanding, and the author wrote about some research that is going to be very compelling and of interest to the school leadership community, something that's going to change our lives, some new data, some new information that is going to be just absolutely stunning to the school leadership community. So that's what makes high impact. And they don't accept every manuscript that comes across their desk. In fact, one of the things that you'll want to look for when you're publishing in an academic journal is, what is their acceptance rate? Because the lower the acceptance rate, the more they scrutinize each manuscript that comes across their desk to make sure that it meets the high quality standards of the manuscript, which is also published. Each of the peer reviewers are given a list of things that each journal, each manuscript has to meet a certain set of criteria, a certain set of standards. So they use rubrics to grade these things. So imagine you send in your manuscript. It goes out to peer reviewers. These reviewers then look at it, and the first thing they might do is just give it a desk review. Does this even meet the standards of our journal? If it doesn't, it's immediately rejected. But if it does meet the standards of the journal, then what happens then is it goes out to those reviewers who then thoroughly read it, vet it for everything it has to offer. The methodology, the data, the literature review. Is the research sound? Are the discussions and the findings appropriate? All of that is graded and highly reviewed. And then even after that, they'll pick it apart. They'll break it down. And then they will send it back to the author with recommendations and suggestions, basically saying, look, if you want to publish in this journal, you might be missing 2 or 3 or 4 things. And they might be tedious. They might be piddly little stuff. Believe me, I've gotten back manuscripts from peer reviewers, and I'm like, this is the most tedious thing I've ever seen. Like right down to a missing comma, missing period, or closed parenthesis, something like that. APA formatting might be a little bit off, but if anything, that gives you an idea of how much they put that detail of attention into the manuscript. So they'll send it back to you. You have to make those changes. You might have to expound on your findings a little bit. You might have to add something to your literature review. There might be something, a part of it, just to clean it up and tighten up the manuscript just a little bit more. So then you'll go back and you'll do those things. You'll have some time to do it, and then you send it back in, and then it gets reviewed again to make sure that it still meets those standards. So, it's a long process. And that's just the general process of how submitting to a manuscript works. And as you can see, sometimes that process, depending on the journal, can take up to a year. But some of the higher end journals that maybe only publish one time a year, and that's something else you want to look at, how often does the journal publish? One time a year to publish research, it takes a long time to vet and make sure that the manuscript meets this very, very extreme vetting process. Now, that's typically for your higher end top tier journals. And if you're producing research that meets those standards, that's high level, high impact, very important, is going to be a significant contribution to the field, then yes, you want to reach out to those journals that are high-end, high-impact, and just know that it's going to be a long process. It's going to be a long time before you might see your manuscript in that academic journal. If that's not for you, let's talk about some other journals that are out there that are a little bit more of a possibility for folks who need to publish and have an understanding of how those journals work. So let's break down those journals. Now, we talked about high-impact journals, those real high, real significant journals. And if you searched high-impact journals, you can kind of get get a sense for what those are. I mentioned Journal of School Leadership because that's the one that first comes to mind in my area. But there are lots of really amazing, high impact, very significant journals. Some of them you may have heard on the news or on TV when referring to some latest and greatest research that the news has even picked up on. But I think where academic journals start to take a hit is in this area that we call open access. Now, since the advent of the internet, before that, if you wanted to publish in a journal, literally, you were publishing in a journal. You were publishing in a manuscript in a book that is literally printed and put into a library. That's the old way of doing things. Now, journals are online. Journals are through the internet and through websites, and you have to have licensing and subscriptions to access some of these bigger and better journals. But some journals have moved to more of an open access style. Now, I have to caution you here because there are some great, amazing open access journals out there. Because conceptually, the idea is if we have great research and great information and we want to increase the body of knowledge, we want people to have access to that information, we don't want it behind a paywall. We don't want you to have a subscription to get that information so that graduate students coming up can see that research, can also write about it and put it in their literature reviews. That's the way it should work. So open access journals, a lot of the concept is that we want this available to the public. We want to be able to read it. Well, in theory, that sounds great. And there are some great open access journals that are doing a wonderful job with that. However, there are some open access journals that are just trying to publish to make a quick buck. We call those predatory journals, okay? And there's actually a list. I think it's Carnegie or Cornell University or someone, I can't remember who, actually keeps a list of predatory journals to avoid. You want to avoid the predatory journals. They're called predatory for a reason because what they do is they go out and they try to find people to publish in their journals for a fee. They're charging you money, and they call it a publication fee. But great journals, good quality, high access journals do not charge you for publication, and they should not charge you for publication. We don't charge for publishing. That's not the way academia should work. However, there are predatory journals out there that will, for a fee, publish your article in their journal. And you might find some of these journals are publishing like once a month, even less frequently than that, because they're just taking whatever junk is being sent to them in whatever format, throwing it online, putting it in a PDF, and charging people for it, and then calling it open access. That's not exactly the way it is supposed to work, and there may have been some suggestions recently that open access journals are taking articles from questionable sources and then publishing those articles and then, maybe suggesting that it's quality research when it absolutely is not. These are not all of them, particularly the predatory ones, are not peer reviewed. They're not looked at by experts. They're not reviewed by that rubric and that system of standards that I mentioned, but they get thrown in with that open access group, which is unfortunate because, as I mentioned, there are some really good open access journals out there because the information is just too valuable. Now, for my students, graduate students, doctoral students, particularly folks who work in education, I want to talk about another type of journal, which are just practitioner journals. Now, what a practitioner journal is that it may not lean so much on the high-end, high-level data and research side as much as it's information that a professor like me might want to get out into the hands of people who are doing the work. Maybe there's some information that I have through my research that I have done that I've published in some of the higher end journals, but I could take that information, I can rewrite it in a way that it's more consumable for people who are working in the field, teachers, principals. This is information that you could use. So there are practitioner journals for those folks. They're usually published by practitioner organizations and other folks that are trying to attract more an interest from teachers and principals and so on. It's organizations for them so that we can talk about the latest and greatest techniques in teaching, service, whatever it is that we're working in the field. So, for example, I've had some research recently on mental health and mental health for teachers. And so while I'm publishing that in higher end journals for the academic piece and the research piece, I can retool that information to get it out to principals and teachers so that they they have a deeper understanding of what's going on in mental health for teachers. So I would put that in a practitioner journal so that it's more accessible and easier to consume without all of the methodological jargon, data jargon, analysis jargon that frankly you don't have time to sift through. You just want to get to the meat of the information. You did the research, what does it mean? Well, practitioner journals get to the meat of what does it mean? And there are lots of great practitioner journals out there that are just as fabulous for peer review and science. They may not be double blind, they might be just single blind, single peer reviewed, but they are just as valuable for the practitioner world, and they do add by getting that information out to the people who need it most. So one more thing I want to add. So in the professor world, being a professor, research is a part of the work that we have to do. In fact, there's three big things that professors do each and every day. We teach, we research, and then we give service. And service is usually back to our working communities, and mine is ed leadership. Those are the three big things that we do. And because research is such a big part of it, we conduct research, we have to have a place to publish. So that is why academic journals are so important, is that they are that connection to the universities and to the professors who are doing the work in whatever field, no matter what it is, so that that research and that science can be disseminated in a very thoughtful, qualitative, vetted sort of way amongst our peers. That's what peer review means. So other people who are working in my exact same field, who understand the literature review, who understand the science of the work that's being done in my field or in whatever field other professors work in, so that they can publish in those journals and get that information out. Once it's published, or when it might be approaching publication, what professors do is they go to conferences with their peers and they present that research. And I typically go to the American Educational Research Association Conference, AERA. It is the largest education conference in the world. Happens once a year in April. There's usually about 14,000 educators there, and educational leadership is just one area that's there. But there's lots of areas that also publish there. So that's one really good area. And AERA also has a very high impact, a very important journal that they also publish. So the point I'm trying to make is that academic journals are that connection from professors to the world, so that we can take the science, we can take the research, and we can publish it. Because we don't have access to media. We can't call up NBC News and say, hey, I've got this great research, will you talk about it? Because they're not going to talk about it. But when something comes out that is just amazing, outstanding, impactful in whatever field, then the journals pick up on it and they have access to the media, and that's one way to disseminate the research. That's why academic journals are so important. But what's also important to note is that as a professor, I get to choose. There are lots of journals out there, and some manuscripts are a better fit for some journals than they are a fit for others. And that's something that you'll just have to kind of figure out along the way, because trust me, there are a lot of journals out there. Universities have journals that they produce research for. So when you're looking at their journal, you get to vet the journal just as much as they get to vet you. You can see up front from their website, their requirements, the manuscript requirements, the scope of the journal, to see if what you have written fits into what the kind of publications that they're looking for and the experts that they have. When you get to that point that you're ready to publish, it's important to vet the journal just as much as the journal is vetting you. But what's important to note is that as a researcher, I get to choose where I want to publish. Where do I want to make the most impact? The journal that I get to choose, that's up to me. That's the important piece here. No one can tell me where to publish, when to publish, or how to publish. That's called academic freedom. The academic freedom to be able to publish what I want, research what I want, without any questions from any authorities suggesting that maybe you shouldn't be looking at that topic because it goes against a certain agenda. That's not the way academic freedom works. Professors need to be able to have the space to explore the questions that people are afraid to ask. And that's what research is. So the next time we talk, next week, I want to get into a little bit about what is research? What are we doing with research? How do we even get to those questions? And we'll talk a little bit about more what academic freedom is. Because academic freedom is what leads us to ask those questions, to then produce that research, then writing that manuscript and getting it into these journals that we were talking about today. All right, this week I want to talk about authentic leadership. Now, this is one that you start to look at, and it looks a lot like transformational leadership in a sense, but there are some aspects and traits to being an authentic leader that I think are important. So I want to break these down for you so that you get a sense for what are the characteristics of an authentic leader, and is this the kind of person that you would want to aspire to, as I'm asking my students to start to consider what are their core values and who do they represent, and what kind of leadership style fits the way that you want to lead an organization. So let's take a look at authentic leadership and let's break that down. When we would talk about authentic leadership, it's sort of in the name, right? Authentic, which means you've got someone who is just genuinely who they are. But more important to that, an authentic leader is someone who's just frankly self-aware. They know who they are. They present themselves as who they are and what they are. Is that somebody that you want to follow? I think is the ultimate question here, because someone who is an authentic leader is generally going to have a little more integrity than others. At least that integrity is going to be on display. What might also be on display for this individual is their core values. Who are they as a person? Can you trust them? Is this someone that you can put your trust into? Those aspects are going to be on display. Someone who's just self-aware, they have that integrity, their core values are just there, they're on display, and it's someone that you can put your trust in. So also, that self-awareness comes with understanding their personal strengths, understanding what you're good at and what you're not good at, and being able to say, what I'm good at, I'm going to tackle those tasks. But the things that I'm not good at, those identified weaknesses, maybe that's where a leader cultivates others to bring in someone to tackle those weaknesses. An authentic leader is also empathetic and leads with a certain amount of ethics. Now, it's not necessarily an ethical leader. We'll talk about ethical leadership another time. An ethical leader, that's the primary thing that's on display with an individual. With an authentic leader, what's on primary display is that self-awareness and that self-integrity. You can see how they might be the same, but a little bit different. Authentic leaders tend to make those decisions with integrity instead of making those decisions with ethic or a moral compass. You can see the difference there. Sometimes moral leadership, ethical leadership, and servant leadership are interchangeable because of the presence of that ethical or moral compass. Here, it's more of an integrity compass that's leading the decision making for this individual. Authentic leaders also tend to be very results oriented. So when we talked about transactional leadership, how that individual is pushing towards a certain set of measurable goals, authentic leader is often very results oriented too. They want to inspire and push others in an core value trusting sort of way to get to those results that they're looking for, those meaningful goals that is necessary for the organization. And as we explore each of these leadership traits, what you'll see is that there will be a lot of overlap, especially when we look at moral, ethical, servant leadership, as we just mentioned with transactional leadership. But with an authentic leader, there is that commitment to growth, growing others, supporting others, continuously learning and improving leadership skills for everyone in the organization, because it's more tied for this individual towards those results than towards the individual. That's the difference. When we talk about moral and servant leadership, continuously growing others is tied to improving them. For an authentic leader, growing others is tied to growing the organization. Just a slight little difference there. Now, when you think about authentic leadership, I think about one of my first bosses that I had. She's retired now, but you knew where you stood. There was no question. She was authentic in that respect. She wanted you to be better. She wanted the school to be better. And so she had those expectations of you. You always knew where you stood. Now, we weren't friends. We weren't colleagues. We weren't going out and having drinks after school or anything like that. It wasn't that kind of relationship. But it was a strong working relationship. There was a trust between us. There was a constant communication, and that engagement was there. Didn't always have necessarily a positive work environment, but anytime a challenge happened, we could navigate those challenges together. And we would do that through conversation, trust, Self-awareness, hey, where are we and how are we going to get to the next level and getting to the next result. So authentic leaders may not always be happy-go-lucky, friendly, happy kind of people. You'll often see this with pro athletes all the time. They might come across as kind of jerky, just kind of standoffish, and they don't want to hang out, they don't want to sign autographs, they're just kind of just weird that way. That's still authenticity. These folks are very self-aware of who they are, very results-oriented, and maybe they don't want anything to get in the way of the success that they're having. So that's an example of authentic leadership. So you might necessarily get this great brooding personality with an authentic leader. What you might get is just someone who's results oriented. You know where they stand, you know where you stand, and the goal is to just move the organization forward. You're committed to growing, we're committed to growing the organization, getting the job done here. There may not be a whole lot of personal growth, there may not be a whole lot of personal fulfillment, but at least you know that this person's got integrity, they have personal strengths, you know where they stand, and they are exactly who they say they are. That's authentic leadership. All right, fellow teachers, principals, folks in higher education, it's summertime. You made it. Congratulations. Super proud of you. It's a long road. Even here in my house, at least in the podcast studio house, my son just graduated high school, which is an amazing accomplishment. I'm very proud of him. Lots of celebrations this past week. But now he's on to the next big step. He's going off to college in the fall. So we're very, very proud of him. But for my teachers and my principals out there, you're exhausted, I know. And some of you aren't done. Some of you don't finish up for another week, maybe this week, maybe early next week, and some of you even go into June, and for that, I am sorry. But for those of you who are out, what I wanted to say is I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to all of you, because the job that we do in education is often highly scrutinized and a thankless job. And there's probably a lot of people out there that, well, you're paid well for it. I think teachers could be paid better. I think principals could be paid better. But the unsung heroes out there is everyone in education. We have people working behind the scenes too. We have superintendents who are out there advocating for students on the state level, trying to get more funding and more resources to do the job that we need to do. We have counselors out there that helped put together those high school transcripts and make sure that students will graduate on time. We have instructional aides that have been working in special ed classrooms that have been supporting students all year long. We have administrative assistants, secretaries, PEMS clerks, attendance clerks, all kinds of folks, and school nurses working behind the scenes, making sure that students are taken care of, attendance is recorded, and the budgets are being done. We have so many people that work in the school environment that need to regroup and refresh this summer because it's a thankless job. And I want to say thank you again for the work that you do. Because as we enter the summer, what I want to make sure that you do is that I want to make sure that you prioritize taking care of yourself and taking care of each other. Your wellness is so important. There are so many people out there that are struggling, and it's a silent struggle. They're dealing with depression, anxiety, worry, concern, some of it personal, some of it professional, some of it private. We all fight demons that we don't talk about publicly for one reason or another. And we push those demons deep down inside of us, and we just deal with it. We just handle it. And I don't think there's any other group in the world that's just more capable of just handling the business than teachers and principals do. Educators are the ones that just take care of business. We are confronted constantly with a lack of resources, a lack of information, a lack of funding, and yet the job doesn't go away. We still have work to do. So we just handle the business. So spend this summer taking care of yourself. Get out there and accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. Get to the gym, watch the movie, read a book, go to the pool, go to the beach, go for a drive, go on vacation, binge watch your favorite show. Whatever it is, take care of yourself. Eat right, exercise, drink water, which is something I got to work on, and just make sure that you're prioritizing your self-care. And look, it's okay to not be okay. And that's becoming a cliche, but I want to make sure that you understand that if you're not doing well, there are places and resources that can help you. There are people that can help you and support you. Reach out. Tell them, I'm not doing well. I need help. Have that conversation so that you don't reach another level where you can't return from that. So take care of yourself, please. Also, spend some time reflecting, reassessing. Some of you are going to be moving into other jobs or other positions, other schools, maybe even moving to another state. You might even be moving into another career because education finally pushed you out. Whatever that is for you, reassess. Take some time to reflect. What worked for you? What didn't work for you? Why didn't it work for you? Try to identify those personal areas of professional growth that you want to work on each and every day. You've heard me mention that I'm also an umpire. And when I'm umpiring a baseball game and we work together with a crew, we always ask each other, what are you working on today? Because umpiring, believe it or not, is continuous improvement. Look, the game is different every single time we step on the field. You never know what you're going to face. So even as an umpire, we're constantly reflecting, reassessing, and working on something so that we can improve. Educators should be doing the same thing. So what are some of those things that you want to work on as you move into the next school year so that you can improve? What are your goals? But most importantly, balance. It's important to balance your professional life with your personal life. It absolutely is. Don't miss that soccer game because of some stupid grades that are due. It's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. Do your job, do it well, but find that personal balance. And the last thing I would say is connect with your colleagues. Being an educator is a tough enough job, but it's even tougher if you're trying to do it by yourself. There's a wealth of resources around you. The people that you work with are amazing and they can help you, and they generally do. So find those colleagues, find those mentors, and create that support network for yourself. And if it's not something you're good at, one-on-one, face-to-face, there's lots of social media out there for it. Facebook groups, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever it is that works for you. Identify that group, make those connections, and work with people. Reddit is also another good place where you can connect and build that supporting network to get new ideas, conferences, books that are working, new teaching techniques, whatever it is, so that you can get a fresh perspective, some new ideas. What are the trends? What's the and I try to work on that too. Find that podcast that works for you. Hopefully it's this one where you can get a little more inspired and a little more understanding and staying up to date of what's happening in the field of education, because it's just too important. But last but not least, put the bad stuff behind you. Focus on an important summer. Focus on the things that are important to you, friends, family, relationships, podcasting, binge watching your favorite TV show, books, going to the beach, travel, whatever it is. Enjoy that. And most importantly, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.